there's two of the CTC tools that I wanted to share with you here today. So if I come over here to Express Tools, Family Tools is one of the free tools, and I've had that for a while. So I'm going to start with that, but then when I started working on these content projects for some clients, there was a lot of repetitive work that I needed to do, and so Family Processor really just was a godsend. It gave me just the tools I needed to do a lot of repetitive processing across multiple family files for these ongoing projects, and so I'm going to share with you a few of the things that I did there. So as I said, I'm going to start here with Family Tools. This one's actually free, so you can download it directly from the CTC website, and it's got a couple handy tools in here. I'm just going to point out the things that I've been using in this for quite a while now. There is this one over here, this tab on the right here, which is the Family File Version Detector. So of course, when you're digging through old content, sometimes you're not sure which version it was in, and you may or may not be ready to upgrade the files to the latest version. And in fact, in this project that I was alluding to that I've been working on with a client, they sent me a bunch of families that they already had that they wanted processed, and then of course we had to make modifications and then build some new ones from scratch. Well, they're in a certain version that we're doing the project in. We were working in 2013 to build the content, but some of the files they sent me were in 2014. So you try and open them, and it says you can't open them. So that this little tool here is just really handy to kind of see what everything is saved in, before you begin and inadvertently open something that you maybe didn't want to open, right? So I just browse over here, and I'll go to a location where I have some files stored, and I just put a small sampling of the files that I was working on, in a folder here that I've just called versions, right? It doesn't really matter what it's called, but you can see there's a decent collection of files right here, and you just click this Detect Versions, and it doesn't take that long, just a few seconds here, and it goes through, and you can see most of the files are in 2013. But I have some that are in 15, and then when I scroll down, I get some really old ones down here. Unknown version 2011, undetectable 2008, whatever that means. So it just kind of gives me a lowdown of what I'm dealing with. And so then if I want, I can go back out and I can kind of parse them out into different folders as appropriate, right? So that's a really neat, simple tool that we have available there. Another one that's really handy is the type catalog tools. So I'm not sure if you work with type catalogs or not, folks on the call, but basically, when you load a family and it pops up that dialog box that says we've, got multiple types that we can load in, that's called the type catalog, and it's just a text file. And if I come over here to this folder right here, I've got a shortcut to the out-of-the-box residential doors folder, right? This is 2016, so I'm in the Libraries U.S. Imperial Doors Residential. And they're now shipping all the doors with a type catalog. Now, here's the family, and here's the type catalog, right? And if you open it up, sorry, there it is, and let's just make that a little narrower. Okay, so if we open it up, you can see, these are the types that are available for that family, and it's in this kind of text file here, and it's got to be formatted just so, and it can be, if you get one of these little quotes out of the way or something like that, it can cause it to not load properly. And then if you're working in imperial units, this double quotes, it can be a little bit confusing and so on. So getting the formatting right can be challenging. So most of us tend to do this work in Excel instead. So if I come back over here, I've got a couple examples here of files I was working on, and here's an example of the type catalog that I was working with Excel, and you can see it's got a few more types in it than the one that I just showed you. So you can imagine trying to create all these types in the family editor would be kind of slow and tedious, right? So anyway, you kind of get them in here, and then of course you can take advantage of the the great little tools in Excel to kind of drag things down or make changes or whatever. So once you've got it all done the way you want, this is in a comma delimited file, right? So I'm just going to close this file here in Excel, and I'm not going to save it, right? So let me just minimize this. So I've got 3 of those, right, and they're all similar. So over here, you could do it in Excel. You can do save as. You could save it as a text format. You've got to do it in the DOS format, and then sometimes there's like 2 or 3 steps because sometimes I'll even have to go into Notepad and do a little search and replace. It's it's not hard to do, but it's just busy work. You got to remember all the steps and do it properly. Well, with this tool, it's kind of quick and easy because all I have to do is point to those comma delimited files that I have. So I've got this folder right here. It'll find all three of them. And then all I have to do is just say, let me show you that folder, right? You can see right now it's just CSVs, right? But when I press this button here, it's going to copy all of that to text files and create the text file for me in the correct format and take care of all those steps that I would have otherwise had to do manually. So it's a nice little tool that really helps if you're doing a lot of type catalogs. You know, it really can be a godsend. And the last tool in here that's worth talking about in this family tools is these two tabs here do a little bit of shared parameter management. Now CTC has a more robust tool that does more things with shared parameters, but this one is kind of nice to just compare two shared parameter files and then merge them together. You know, best practice says we should only have one shared parameter file for the entire office. Okay, so hopefully that's something that you're able to maintain. But you know, you and I both know what happens. Somewhere along the line, you either download some content or somebody in the office creates another shared parameter file they didn't know, or it came from a different office. Whatever the case may be, we end up with these multiple shared parameter files. So I've just got a few examples here. My ABC shared parameters here, and then my PFA shared parameters here. And you know what I can do now is just click compare here. And now these two are pretty wildly different from one another. So I'm actually getting quite a few differences here. But you can see I've got 4 conflicting parameters, and then it lists, you know, here the results of what it found. Okay, but if I wanted to now, you know, merge these two together, I can actually take those same 2 files here, and you know, maybe my East Coast office, you know, was working with this one, and my West Coast office was working with this one, and I want to just put them all together into one file. One thing I really like is that down here, there's this auto append the word merged at the end. So if you want to be absolutely sure that you did it correctly before you commit, you know, and make that the permanent one, then you can check that little box right there, and then when you merge these two together, right? So I've got these two selected here, and I'll say merge and preview here, and it kind of does all of that, and it's created this new version here, PFA, with the merged at the end, and that should be right out here. No, okay, it's in a different folder. Well, I'm not sure where it put it, but where did it put it? Put it right. Well, it said it put it right there. Oh, no, I got to save the results. Ha, missed a step. There we go, and there it is right there. Okay, so it creates the shared parameter file for me, and then you know I can double check it, I can test it, make sure it's all correct, and then if I want to rename it manually, I can. But of course, you've got your originals that you can archive and back up. So you know, not bad for a free tool, right? I mean, these are the things that are available here in the free tool. So I'm going to close this one out. And there's actually a couple other things you can do in there as well. So I definitely recommend that you go check that one out. Now, meanwhile, I have the whole BIM Manager Suite loaded here, and today I'm going to talk just about the family processor. Okay, we'll look at some of the other tools in the future, but family processor is just a really terrific tool if you've got lots of families that need the same work done to them. Okay, so I'm going to click it here, and it's going to complain. Okay, so this tool only works if you're in a family file. So the file that I have open here in the background is a project file. So I'll just sort of minimize that, and I'll go here to my application menu, come down to new family. It doesn't matter what I load here. I could load anything, but I usually just do a generic model. Then I do close hidden windows, and I minimize it to get it out of the way. And so with that family file in the background, I can now, unless of course I still have the project selected, with that family file in the background, I can now, you know, load the family processor. Okay, so it loads up like this. Now, pretty good thing to do first is to click this new settings button here. That's going to clear out anything that I was doing previously, just in case, because you don't want to accidentally, apply changes to the current family that you didn't intend, right? And the other thing we might want to do is, maybe make this just a touch bigger. Okay. So I'm not going to do this in the order of the tabs here. I'm going to actually kind of go in a slightly different order, kind of what seems to flow a little better for me here. One of the things is, you can actually use this tool as an upgrade tool. So once again, if you get that batch of, if you think about those ones that I detected the versions on a moment ago, if you get that batch of files and they're all in different versions, and you want to just kind of get them all to your current version before you keep going, then what you can actually do is, browse to that location, right? And I'm going to just choose a simpler folder so that we don't have to wait. That folder that I showed you a few moments ago had about 110 families in there. Now, it only took about 2 minutes to process all of those, but just the same, I don't want to have the I don't want to make have 2 minutes of dead air time here. So I'm just going to grab this folder right here that just has a few. There's only 3 in there, just to show you the process. So you can see it read the folder. Here's all the files. I'll choose Select All, and then I'll add those selected files down to the list here. Now I'm on this final tab here, Select Families and Begin. Any changes you make in any of these tabs, it's going to apply to the families that are on this tab. Okay, so right now just these 3, and all I'm going to do is come down here and check this box which says resave these even if no changes are needed. So in parentheses it says this is useful for upgrades. So if I pointed to that bigger file, or rather folder, with the 110 families in there, it would just go through them one at a time, open them up, and save them in the latest version. So when I click Begin Processing and then here Continue to make sure, it's going to actually run through this, and you can see the little upgrade notices flashing by really quickly in the background there. And it's now processed these 3 files. Now again, I timed it when I did the 110, and it took about 2 minutes. So not too bad to upgrade, 110 family files, right? So that's one thing that you can do with it, sort of like a warm-up here. Just let's get some, let's upgrade some families. Now I'm going to click New Settings again, and that should clear everything. And I want to look at the Material tab next. So over here we've got this change materials, and you can do a couple different things here. We can delete materials, add materials, or change existing materials. Okay, so there may be several things in the different family files that you're processing that you might want to do. For example, some of those default materials show up a lot. Default wall or default phase materials, those kind of things. And then if anybody's ever brought an AutoCAD file into a family, you get those render materials that say render, and then they have the RGB values, right? So there's a lot of those sort of bogus materials that you usually want to strip out, right? So how do you do that? Well, you could come over here and just type the name of the material. So if you know for sure, you want to get rid of that default phase or something, or poche, right? You could type it in here and you could just add that manually. But it's a lot easier to do this, right? So you click this Select from Family Files button, and then you can browse here. Point to a folder. So I'm going to go to that same folder we've been working in here. I probably should have made a shortcut to it, but let's see, right there, and which one did I want to do from here? Let's go with this guy here. So I've got this folder here I called From Revit City. Now, I'm sure we've all been to Revit City, and sometimes you can find good stuff up there, sometimes not so good, right? So it's like any sort of internet site. The quality is always something you want to check, right? Because anybody can post there, and not everybody follows the same procedures as you do. So one of the things that I think is really good to do when you download files from the internet, be it from Revit City or any other site, is to just basically sanitize them a little bit, right? And so this is one of the things I'm going to do here with the materials, right? So now this from Revit City just has a handful in here. There's only there's about 10, okay? So I'll select them all, and I'm going to add those files right here. Now when I click OK, it's actually going to read all of those files and then populate the list here with the materials that it finds within all of those different files. Okay, and so this kind of gives me an idea of what I'm dealing with. Like right here in the middle, you can see this collection of materials that have these really long and very specific names that maybe I don't want to keep, right? And then down here, there's some names here in French, right? At least it looks like French to me. And then there's certainly the default names here that I mentioned. And down here, I'm kind of surprised, but there's only one of these little render material ones from AutoCAD. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, just to do this a little bit more quickly, is I'm just going to kind of, just grab a couple of these. These are the ones I want to delete. So maybe I'm going to delete the render material, and I'm going to delete the phase materials, right? And I'll click OK there. So these materials are going to get deleted when I when I complete the processing. Now, over here under Add, I could actually create an entirely new material if I wanted. So maybe to all of these, I want to add a material called, hardware. Okay, so I'll just type in a name here and click Add Material, and then I come over here and I input the RGB color values that I want this material to have when it's shaded, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and put in sort of a brownish gray color there. And then finally, I'll come over to the Materials to Change tab, and I'll click the same, set of families here. It remembers them, so I just have to kind of go in and then go right back out again, and it's going to populate that same list again. And when it comes up now, instead of deleting these materials, I'll be able to select them and make changes to them. So like for example, this one that's in French here, and I won't try and pronounce it and embarrass myself with my poor French pronunciation, but that looks like it's supposed to be some sort of a gray material. So I'm just gonna type gray for now, okay? And I looked up what Boutelier, there I did it, I tried to pronounce it anyway, and I've already forgotten what it means. So anyway, I'm just going to call it gray. So I'll just do those simple changes, okay? So at this point, when I come back over here now, you can see that, on the Materials tab, I actually did 3 different things. I'm deleting some of the materials, I'm renaming some, or I'm adding one rather, and I'm renaming another one, okay? So real simple stuff. So now I'm going to browse out to that same folder and find it right here. Click OK. So I'm going to grab the same, let's see if I can simplify this a little bit. I think just these projector ones have the materials that I just did. So just to speed this up a little bit, let me just select a couple of these, and then I'll click Begin Processing down here. Now there are some other settings down here. There's a preview mode if you don't want to permanently make the change, but you want to capture any errors before you do, so that could be helpful. And then, of course, the resave. And then if you want to, do this, you can save it to a different folder just in case. So basically, that's your way of preserving a backup with this tool. So this tool will not create the standard Revit backups if you don't check that. But if you check that, you're going to point them to a different folder, and then it will leave your originals alone. So if you want to keep the backups, you could do that. And of course, this you could tell it just to only log the errors, or if you leave that unchecked, it's the verbose logging and it logs everything. So let me go ahead and process this and continue. I don't know if the CTC folks are going to chime in on that question there, but it's asking about, besides color, if we can do transparency and other things. I haven't found a way to do other than just the color, so there is some post-processing that you might need to do in that case, but CTC, if they can chime in and add to that, that would be great. Now you can see here that I did get some errors in the log here, that some of these materials just didn't exist. So there was nothing to delete because they didn't exist, right? But for the stuff that did exist, it went ahead and made the changes, right? And I'm going to go ahead and close Family Processor here for a second, and I'll just open up one of those files. And I think it was this home projector was one of them, one of the ones I had right here. And if I go to the materials, then it still has some of the French down here, but you can see that this one got renamed to gray, for example. And then if we scroll through here, we're not seeing any of the default phase materials. So if they were here, they've been deleted. And then I believe I also added hardware, right? Yeah, there's the hardware, and you can see the color I asked for. Okay, so again, there's still more processing to do here. So if I was doing this for real, I would take more time and be a little bit more careful in choosing all my things. But I usually do batch process, or let me rephrase that, process it in batches. So in other words, my mind, the way it works is, if I'm thinking about materials, I have a better shot of getting all the settings right for materials first, and then I'll come and I'll run a second pass with the tool later to do something like shared parameters or other things. Now, that being said, there's absolutely nothing stopping you from going to Family Processor and going through each and every tab here and doing everything all in one pass. Again, I'm just not that aggressive, so I usually like to, kind of do a couple things at a time. But obviously you can feel free to do it in whichever order you like. Now, let me follow up on a couple of the things we did here. So under Change Materials, we do have this Delete tab, and as you saw, I added some of the default ones. There's actually an option to always look for those and delete them. So up here at the top, there's this options button. And if I click that, you can see there's a variety of different options. So, you can remember the last settings, for example, right? You remember when I started, I clicked new settings just to clear all of that. Well, that's because here my default is to remember the last setting. So even if I close and I quit Revit, it's going to remember what I did last time. So, if you don't want to do it over and over again, you'd click new to clear it. Some other things, remember the windows, warnings and so forth. So there's different settings here. But down here, this checkbox, all of these are those sort of default materials that Revit creates automatically. And so you can have it just be searching for those all the time. And it will always delete them whenever you run the tool. So if you never want any of these default mass materials or any of these other things, you can just have that as a kind of an ongoing setting up there in options, right? So that's a setting right there. And then over here on this first tab is actually some really handy stuff. These are all the settings, if I kind of move this out of the way, that are back here on the properties palette in all families, right? So all these little check boxes here, work plane based or always vertical or cut with voids, all those kind of things. So imagine you've got a whole bunch of families that you want to make work plane based, or a whole bunch of families that you want to set to shared, right? So you could open this up and say set that to checked, and now it's going to run through a whole collection of families and set them to shared families, right? So really quick way to kind of run through and configure all of these sort of global settings, omni class, anything on that properties tab basically, right? So those are all things that you can do there on that first tab. Excuse me. Okay, so let me switch over to change parameters now. So what I'm going to do is clear the settings here, just in case I click something I didn't mean to. I'm going to go to change parameters, and here we have a variety of things that we can do. We can delete any parameters that we don't want. So sometimes there's some parameters laying around in a family, depending on the source that you got them from. So for example, and we get that select from family file button here as well, like we saw in the material tab. So for example, if I click that and I do select families, what I'm going to do here is remove all of these items, and I've got a different folder that I want to look in for this, and it's this folder here called seating, and I've got, I don't know how many that is, it's about a dozen, 2 dozen chair families in here. I don't remember which one or ones has the parameter I want to delete. So what I'm going to do is just select them all, okay, and click OK here. And it will take a moment or two while it processes that. So while that's doing, let me see what the question is here. Purging the. Okay, that's more of a oh yeah, there we go. Great idea. Okay, yeah. So that was more of the question was more of like a suggestion for like a wish item, and the CTC folks have already chimed in and added that to their wish list. So fantastic, you beat me to it. Okay, so you can see here this collection of parameters appears. Now I almost always immediately click here next. Okay, because I like to group them by parameter type. So you can actually click any of these headers as you would expect, and it sorts the list by by that column. So now you can see all my material parameters are together, all my text parameters are together. And there's this render course material here. So my client gave me a bunch of furniture files that they had accumulated, and some of them came from other firms and so forth. And this other firm had a course render material that they used in all of their furniture families, and my current client didn't want that material, or didn't want that material or that parameter. So this is a really simple example of that. I'm just going to select that and click OK. And so now it'll go through every one of those families, and wherever it finds that parameter, it's just going to delete it. Okay, so that's the Delete Parameters tab. And again, I'll just do the one for now, but we could certainly do more. I'll come back to shared parameters in a moment, but add family parameters. Well, here you could click right in here and add any parameter you want. Now some of these chairs already have this parameter. Like we decided we were going to do with the chairs, each chair would have 2 types, with arms and without arms, and we were just going to control that with a checkbox. Now I think I already have a show arms parameter in the files, so I'll rename it something different here, and I'll call it include arms, just so that it doesn't conflict. And then what kind of what kind of parameter is that, and it is a yes no way down here at the bottom of the list. And if I click add parameter, it's going to include that here, and then I can say it's an instance parameter if I wanted it to be. Otherwise it's going to be a type. Here it is, and then you could put in even a default value if you want. Okay, yes, no, or formula or whatever else. So I'm not going to put in a default value, so I'm just going to let it default to unchecked like it normally would, right? So there's that one. So that's adding a parameter. And then come over here and parameters to change, same thing. If I click the select from family files and then click this again, it'll remember my previous list, and it'll populate that list here in a moment. And then what I'm going to do here is there's also some material parameters here that have names that that we didn't care for, right? So once again, if I sort by material, they say render back, for example, and render leg, right? So I'm going to add these two right here. We already deleted render course, so I'm going to select those two right there, click OK, and I'm going to give these new names right here. So I'm just going to call this back material, and then this one here I'm going to call leg material. And what's really neat about this is you can change the parameter too. You can change it from type to instance. You can input a new value. You can even put a formula in there. Now, putting a value or a formula is a little tricky with material parameters, so I'm going to leave those blank for right now. But if it was a length parameter and you wanted to preset it to 2 feet or something, you can just type that in right ahead of time, and you can even change the grouping that it's under here, right? So I'm going to assume that those are in materials and finishes and just leave it right where it is. So let me just do those 3 things. So we're deleting a parameter, we're adding a parameter, and we're changing 2 of the parameters here. And then I'll come back over here, click browse. Obviously I want to do the seating folder this time. Click OK, and then I'll select all the files, add them to the list. And actually, you know what? Let me just select, just to speed this up here, let me just remove about half of them. Here, I'll just do about half of them there. And I should be able to tell, by looking at the dates, which ones it did. Well, it was the ones at the start of the list, it looks like, anyway. So it's moving along pretty good, though. You can't cancel this once it starts, so you want to be sure, right? Okay, now let me close the family processor here, open this up, go to here, and then seating, and yeah, these over here are the ones that I just did, right? So I don't know, let me grab this conference chair, bring it over. Okay, so if I look at my family types now, show arms was the one that was already there, but you see that's the one I just added, include arms. So that one can get created, and then if it included the I don't remember which ones included the one with the that I renamed, okay, but it would have renamed them here. But you can see there's a seat material and a leg material, so this might have been one of the ones that renamed, or it might not have been. I forgot to write down which ones needed that change first. But you can see that it's going to run through there, and it's going to do all those changes. Now, it's not going to prevent you from having to do changes manually. It's not like you can just run this tool, run it once, and do everything that you need. What it is going to do, though, is if you think about all of the repetitive tasks that you want to do from one family to the next to add that level of consistency to your library, then this tool is just fantastic for that, because it allows you to go through there and very methodically say, okay, I want to get all my materials, following this standard, and I want to get all of my material name or my parameter names following this standard, and get them all squared away. And that's why I kind of like to do them in these little batches, because I can focus on each of those tasks. So I'll often run the tool 2 or 3 times, and then my final pass is I'll just sort of spot check, and I'll open up different families and just make sure that I didn't miss anything obvious, right? And there's some edits you just have to make in the family, so you are going to still open those up and make them. Here's another really cool one is the shared parameter features that are in there. So let me close this guy, and I guess I can close this projector too. All right, and again, you need to have a family open in the background before you can run this, so I'll leave that blank one open. I like to close because otherwise it might not process the one that's open. However, there is an option for that. So if I click over here, instead of doing it to multi-family files from the big list here, you could actually say do it to the current family file. It won't save it. It'll leave the saving up to you, right? But it'll just process the current file, and then you save it and close it when you're ready, right? But if you're doing multiple files, then I like to close everything except for an empty bogus file. That way I don't miss any, so that's just the way I like to do it. All right, so let me come back here to change parameters. And what I'm going to do here is point to one of those shared parameter files that I was showing you at the start of this. So come back over here to here, and I don't know which one would be better here, but I'll do the ABC, pretend I'm ABC Architects here. So that's the shared parameter file, right? And now you could use this tab to add any shared parameter file or any shared parameters to your family. So if you want to add one shared parameter to a bunch of families, you can use this tool. So for example, what my client and I were doing is we were creating a text parameter in all of the families that we're creating and giving it a version ID. So then this way, we know inevitably users are going to have comments, they're going to have questions, they're going to have issues that they want, and we're going to go back to the family files and we're going to make changes. So then when they get updated in the library, we just wanted some easy way to be able to tell whether or not users were using an old version of the family or not. They come back and they say, oh, the door doesn't behave properly, or the leaf isn't doing what it's supposed to do, and we say, well, we fixed that, right? And then we can look at their family and we see, oh, you've got the old version, and then it tells, it's just a way for us to be able to troubleshoot that. So this is just a simple text parameter. So I'm going to add that selected parameter. It can be instance or type, so that's really up to you. It doesn't really matter for this example. But again, we can add the value or the formula. So here's what I like to do. I like to do this by formula, right? So if you put text in quotes, for those of you that are on the call, I'm sure a lot of you are family authors, otherwise you wouldn't be on this call, right? So you probably know that if you want to permanently assign a value, you just put it in quotes, right? So the format I use is something like, I guess my cap lock is on. There we go. Okay. Something like V1 underscore and then a code for today's date, right? So I'll put 2015-05-11. And then as long as that's in quotes, it'll put that in the text field, but it'll gray it out. So the user can't change it, but it's readily available. And I'll go ahead and make it an instance just so that it'll show up right away when we click on it. We won't have to go digging to look for it, right? So I've got that right there, and because of the formula, I don't really have to worry if it's instance or type. It'll be filled in as read-only no matter what. Okay, and then the other thing that I really like here is this replace with shared parameters. So here I'm going to select some existing families, and I'm going to clear this list and browse to a different one. And I'll just use those 3 families that I had in that type catalog folder. So you remember the ones we processed at the start of the call here, right? So I've got those 3. I'll select them and I'll add them to the list here. And oops, it looks like I forgot to upgrade these. So they will get upgraded when I do this, though. And what I'm going to do is just take the height, the depth, and the width, or length, I guess, the 3 basic dimensions, and I'm going to replace those with the corresponding shared parameter versions. That way they can be on schedules, right? So depth, here, because I loaded a shared parameter file, it's reading it. I'll choose that one. So these are the parameters in my shared parameter file now. And I'll choose height, and then this, I'll choose length. Right there. Okay, so really simple example. So we're basically just doing 2 things here. We're adding a shared parameter for the version ID, and we're replacing these existing family parameters in those 3 files with the shared parameter version. So I'll come over here, clear the list, browse out to that type catalog folder, select the same 3 files, add them, and again, if I wanted to, let me just show you what that looks like. I'll click the Save to Alternate Location and click Browse here, just so you can see it. And right here, I'll just make a new folder, and I'll just call this Processed. And click OK. I think we're good to go. Let's go ahead and process it. Okay, so it gives you a summary here. Now, I still have that box checked, so it's going to actually look for these materials and delete them. So that's why all that stuff up there. But then here, oh, it looks like the, see, this is why it's good to read this. This isn't going to hurt me, but like if I didn't want it to look for the render course material or the include arms, like I really don't want the include arms. So actually I am going to cancel this and go remove that because what I forgot to do was click new settings, right? So it's still remembering the stuff that I did on these tabs, okay, and the stuff that I did here, right here. So I'm going to remove this item, and I'm going to remove this item here, and just keep this, and just keep just keep this, and keep this, right? So I'm adding that parameter, and I'm replacing with shared parameters here. So let's go back now, select to begin, and click process. So now you can see it's removed those ones I didn't want, okay, those actions that I didn't want, and I'll do continue processing, and it's only 3 files, so it should just take a few moments here. All right. Again, the errors are mostly because those materials didn't exist, so it's just letting us know that those materials didn't exist. While I've got this open, let me just point out something before I show you the files. It's possible to take this log, copy it to your clipboard, or save it to a text file, okay? And if we look right here, depending on your, how much documentation you need, I've got an example here of several logs that I was creating, and I was just prefixing them with the name of what I was processing and then some sort of a code just so I could kind of remember what the log contained. The reality is I probably won't ever open any of these logs, but it's sort of a trail of, this is everything that was done and processed there just in case you want it. So you certainly have that option available. But let me look at the process folder here. You can see there's the 3 items. Now naturally, these are using type catalogs, so I'd have to manually copy those type catalogs over that we created, but I'm just going to actually open the family file, so I don't really care about that right now. And here's the ABC version, right? You can see it right there with the formula that it put in, and so it's grayed out right there. And then if we select one of these parameters here under dimensions and go to modify, you can see that it's now a shared parameter, right? So it did all that for me. And let me just go ahead and load this into my current project just to show you where the version ID would show up here, right? So if I select it here, you can see it's right there grayed out. So the user can't change it, but it's very clearly what version it is, so if we're trying to troubleshoot, we can figure that out.